Okay, thank you for a little break. And we're moving on to finance and a wonderful briefing by our finance team.
Good morning, Council. Thank you for the opportunity to come to you and present some basic information about the finances for the county. This is an overview that we do every year with the Council, so a lot of it will be repetitious to those that you have been here before, but happy to answer any questions as we go through. We're going to take turns on different slides and do our best to get this information to you. So the agenda, we'll do some introductions in the next slide for us. We'll talk about financial roles and responsibilities, do some financial policies overview, and specific updates on some of the other policies. And then we do a pretty thorough building a financial foundation that goes through a lot of our funds and data from the 2023 year close. And then there's always room for question and answers throughout or at the very end. So the next slide and then the next one. I am Emily Swetzig. I'm the budget director. I've been with the county almost 10 years now and in this role for about 6 years. And it's a pleasure to welcome the new council members. Looking forward to working with you guys, and Chair, very pleased to be working with you again, and Councilor Young. And we'll talk a little bit about what the budget office does in a couple of slides, but I'll hand it over to Mark to introduce himself.
Good morning. I'm Mark Gasaway. I'm the County Finance Director. I work under the County Auditor and through the County Auditor's Office. I've been with the county just over 20 years. And so in this role, I think this is my 14th year. So I get to be the old person on the committee. So.
The veteran.
You can't hear me? I wasn't in the right distance. So anyway, that's me.
Thank you, Mark. Oh, is mine? Can you hear me? Okay, wonderful. Good morning, counselors. Happy to be here today alongside my colleagues, Emily and Mark. My name is Sarah Lowe, and I am the Chief Deputy Treasurer in the Clark County Treasurer's Office. And just like Emily, I too have been with the county about 10 years. And in my role, 9.5. I did a short stint in the budget office. And prior to that, some work in the city of Portland with budget and in the state as well. So familiar with finance and part of this three-legged stool. So happy to be here.
Next slide, please. Okay, and then the next slide, we go into just some short roles and responsibility slides for each of our areas. But in general, the finance team has been in place for many years. It predates my tenure here, but we're chaired by the county manager, and the whole team includes the county manager, the deputy county manager, myself, Mark and Sarah, and then we also have the human resources director. That's part of our larger team. We meet almost weekly as a team to discuss different policies, different projects, but our goal is to provide analytical support to the county manager and a lot of the work that she does to evaluate financial impacts for different decisions that are being made, the budget process, and we do pull in other resources as needed, for example, like the assessor's office or other experts within the county if a specific project entails that. Next slide, please.
So as Emily mentioned, there's kind of a three-person team here that we work with to manage the financial aspects. So we're going to go through how each of our offices contribute to that. So the auditor's office, we're primarily responsible for all of the financial reporting for the county. So the annual financial reports, the popular annual financial reports, all of those are created through our office. We also, as a central service provider, support all of the departments in their reporting needs as well. So if someone in Public Works is looking at how to get the data out of our financial system, we have a specialist who helps them with their reporting as well. In addition to the financial reporting aspect, we also have other services we provide. We have a performance audit team that can go out into the different departments throughout the county and help evaluate the effectiveness and efficiency of the programs in each of the departments. We also provide assistance with our annual audit from the state auditor's office. So we're the liaison for our state auditor's office as well. So there's certain aspects of the accounting system that we're responsible for, primarily the internal controls, not just within the auditor's office, but throughout the county. So we'll work with departments to make sure that their internal controls are sufficient to help prevent problems. We have the ability to manage the general ledger. So the accounting system itself, our ERP systems, which is called Workday, we have the administrative capability to control that. So those are the kind of primary functions that the auditor's office is responsible in this financial aspects. And as Emily also mentioned, as a member of the finance team, we provide support to the county manager based on her needs and requests. So we'll help evaluate those things. Although we're an independent office, we work together as a county, as a team. So.
The treasurer's office. So just like with the auditor's office, we are headed by an independently elected treasurer. Our office provides services not only to Clark County, but to the 40 other taxing districts within Clark County. So that's something sort of unique to the treasurer's office. Those districts include school districts, libraries, cities, cemetery districts, and others. The primary services that we provide for the county as well as those districts include the property tax billing and collection, banking services. We do the banking for all those districts where we serve as treasurer, and that includes school districts. So that is a large portion of our work. Cash and debt management, and we'll talk a little bit more about debt management. And then we also operate an investment pool, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as well as we get further into the slides. We also do some financial reporting for both debt and investments. With respect to our role on the finance team, really here just to advise the county manager on matters of debt, finance, and the collection of taxes. So sort of the lens through which this role provides assistance to the county manager.
And the budget office is, in the wording, we do the budget. We facilitate the budget process and we work through all of the different steps of that throughout the year for the county manager, the departments and offices, and then with the council. There's many official intersections where we have public meetings and different types of interactions and decision making, but there's work that has already begun this year for the next year's annual budget. We work on this almost all year long, but we are responsible for facilitating the budget process. We work with the county manager to help her develop her recommendations to the council. And then as part of the finance team, we are just one of the three. I don't know what your guys' experience is with other jurisdictions, but some municipalities and jurisdictions have like a central finance group. Here at the county, it's these three really separate areas that we collaborate together. So the budget office brings that perspective to the finance team and any of the projects that we're working on with the county manager. Next slide, please. So we think it's important each year just to kind of revisit the importance of financial policies for the county. This is something that we have existing policies for, but there's also some that we're still working on. It's an ongoing process improvement and something that we review at least annually to make sure that everything is up to date. But we do see financial policies, and it is part of the Clark County's mission, vision, and strategic actions as a priority. We're currently working on a financial policy update to a financial manual. It is something we started last year, but we're hoping to get some traction on that this year. But this particular slide just kind of shows you on our ClarkNet site, that's our internal website. If you guys haven't visited it yet, there's a page with Clark County financial policies and links to that. There's also a web page that has the financial policies out on the auditor's office on the main county website. So if you have any questions on that, or if you want to take a look at those, let us know if there's anything that you have questions on. And the next slide, I think, goes into just best practice. A lot of what the three of us look at when we are guiding recommendations are best practices, and the Government Finance Officers Association is a very key leading organization that we look to help guide those recommendations on a national level. Of course, there are local and state levels that we have to look at, but this is just a page that shows you where that link is if you're interested in learning more about best practices for financial policies. And this is the fiscal policy plan, and Mark and his team lead the development of this financial trends report where these financial policies are in place. But it's just important to note that these exist. These are decisions that were made by it was commissioners at the time, council now back in 1982 and amended in August 1994. This is the work that Mark is leading with the team to try to revise and update now. Is there anything you'd like to add about that, Mark?
Sure. Each year we produce a report called the Trends Report. In the first section of that Trends Report, it has a copy of these policies, and they're very broad statements about financial measures that the county considers when we're making decisions. So they're not, again, specific, but they're broad enough where we're able to advise and help the council make decisions based on the policies that are already in place. So it's not that we have to come up with something and say, well, we need a policy on that. We do have policies in place. And so all the decisions and all the information that you're provided, we try and go through that lens of what are your policies that we have already. So these are council policies. They're not the auditor's office. They're not, the county manager's policies. These are council policies. So.
Next slide, please. And again, this is just really a slide to show you where you can find this information out on the county's website. It's under the auditor's office, under financial service and financial reports. This is an older slide we've done for a couple years, so it would be updated for the current years when you actually go to the website. The only other thing I wanted to add, and this is something I provided in the update for the budget office, is we've been working diligently on fund policies, minimum fund balance policies. And we've got quite a bit of traction. We've made a lot of progress over the last couple of years, but we do see a few more that need to be finished up. And so we'll be coming forward with conversations about those, hopefully more this year. Next slide. And over to Sarah.
Hold on just a minute. I think we have a question.
Apologies.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
not so much a question, but more a comment. So I'm kind of doing some reflection. We've hit our 2-year point, and I just want to say how much I appreciate the budget team. The county has, from everything I've experienced, the county is run very well fiscally. We have excellent fund balance policies in place. There's checks and balances all over the place. I mean, every time I've had a question on something that looks a little bit strange to me, I go in and it becomes very clear that that's already been thought through 100 times and considered, and it's a part of our policy. One of the things that I think that I have seen is maybe sort of a weakness, but I have also seen the team specifically, strategically working on that, is some of our infrastructure replacement schedule. So we've seen with clean water, we're looking at all of that infrastructure. What does that look like for replacement over time? And we need to start collecting those funds to do that. So there are a few little holes that I have seen that are being plugged at this time. So I just want to say, everybody involved, you do a fantastic job. The county is in great hands, and we have known for quite some time, this to me is important. We knew that we're coming up against some budget restraints because of the deficit that we face, but we've known about that for quite some time. And so we've been able to be working through some things of how we can get through that. So I thought this was a perfect time to thank you for the work that you do and everybody that's involved in it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Young, for mentioning that. I agree. Please continue.
Thank you very much. So in addition to the finance team here, there is also the Clark County Finance Committee. And this committee actually is established within statute. And it has two really primary purposes. And the first one is to review and improve the county's debt policy. And the second one is to review and approve the county's investment policy. The committee is made up of the county treasurer. She serves as chair for the committee, the auditor, and then the council chair. And Councilor Marshall, we are excited to welcome you to the committee. Meetings are open to the public and they are held quarterly. We do talk a lot about, the county's finances in these meetings. We talk about how our pool is performing. We talk about the county's debt portfolio, available debt, and emerging debt issues. Our next meeting is actually February 11th. And more information is available on these meetings on our county website. But it is a publicly noticed meeting, so as many counselors that can attend are welcome to attend those meetings and listen in. So I know Counselor Young, you've listened into them before. Kathleen also listens in sometimes
And I'll
as
just
well.
say if anybody's going to do that, let staff know in case we have to notice it on our calendar.
Oh, do you
for a
guys have to
form.
notice it as well?
Yeah, just
Okay.
on their weekly calendar. So yeah, please let staff know.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, so I do want to dive a little bit deeper into the two policies that this committee is responsible for reviewing and approving because they do impact the work of the entire council, specifically the debt policy. This policy actually was last reviewed and approved in February of 2022 and will be undergoing a review this year in 2025 to review and approve any new changes. Our policy, I'm proud to report, is accredited by the Washington Public Treasurers Association, which is an organization that reviews these policies to ensure that organizations are following best practices in this area and that you're in alignment with state statute and any changes that could be occurring there. There are a few important elements that this policy includes. And for me, the number one that the council should care about is that all debt must be approved by the council in advance of issuance. And just for some context, last year in 2024, the council did get the opportunity to approve a debt issuance for several critical public safety capital projects. And it's a pretty rigorous process where we come before you and we go through all the financials and the council gets an opportunity, to weigh in and have a say there. But you are obligating essentially the full faith and credit of your organization for the term of that, financing or that bond issuance. So it's critical that the council get the opportunity to review and approve in advance. Other sort of important policy provisions, it establishes other roles and responsibilities. It details eligible debt instruments that we're able to issue debt through, structuring preferences, post-issuance compliance. And I would say, again, another critical element is that it ensures that we're in alignment with the county's long-term financial goals. So any debt we issue has to be in alignment with those fund forecasts that we put out and the policies that Mark's going to go into as well regarding capital maintenance and ability to fund it as well.
Just one more comment, if I may, and I don't have those actual figures. Perhaps you might have them or close to them, but I think it's important, especially given we have a couple new counselors, how little debt we are actually in, and that debt is actually good debt, and the ability to borrow, compared to what we've used is, it's minuscule.
Yeah.
So we're in excellent condition with that as well.
Yeah, so we are, and actually we were recently rated by Moody's and we received a confirmation of our AA1 credit rating, which is really the best rating that we can receive for an organization of our size and tax base. So we feel really good about that. They had a lot of really complimentary things to say about Clark County and how it's managing its finances, our strong fund balances, the leadership too as well. So outside of trying to grow the tax base, which we really are as the community continues to grow and we bring industry here, that's really the one sort of thing that would, I think, bring us to the highest rating one can receive, which is AAA. So, but our debt burden is very low. And that is something else that they mentioned. We have about $78 million in debt right now. And I can actually provide you, we're going to have the Q4 report here done in like a week or so, but we have an incredibly low debt burden for an organization of our size and revenue structure. So we can actually, we have capacity up to 2.5% of our assessed value. And there's a lot of numbers I could throw out. I'd rather just send the report so everything is accurate and up to date. And actually, we'll be seeing a little bit of that as well in the jail financing discussion that's upcoming on February 5th. But we have a tremendous amount of capacity. Now, some of that is voted capacity, like a large portion of that. So meaning the voters would have to approve it. But there is still 1.5% that's available by council through council approval. So the main thing though is debt is not a revenue. You have to have the ability to pay back debt. So although we have this, I guess you could say a credit card with a really high limit, we have to be able to, ensure that we can pay that money back. So that's kind of the most important element when we're looking at whether or not we can issue debt. Just to kind of set a little bit more of a parameter around roles and responsibility. The council obviously is in charge of approving the debt, but the treasurer's office really manages the county's debt portfolio. And what I mean by that is we would assist with any debt issuances. We would help to lead that process. We also make all of the annual payments, as well as ensure that we're in compliance with any post-issuance responsibilities. So there's a lot of reporting that has to go on through the life of a debt issuance. So we're responsible for all that. We also hold the contracts for bond counsel and financial advisor. So there are specialized legal counsel that's required for debt issuances, and so that's the bond counsel. And currently, that contract is held by Foster Garvey. And then the county also has a financial advisor that can be brought in on, complex matters of finance. So, like for instance, the jail financing. That's an area where they could provide assistance. And that contract is currently held by PFM, Public Finance Managers. So any questions on debt management? We do have a website, the Treasurer's public website. We have our debt reports are out there. The debt policy is out there. Information on our quarterly meetings is out there as well. So there is quite a bit more information if folks are interested.
Any questions from council?
So that's the debt policy. So the next slide, if you will, focuses on our investment policy. So the Clark County Treasurer's Office, and this is allowed in statute, operates an investment pool for the county and all other local taxing districts. I think there was a lot of discussion last year about the county's investment pool, the balances, who has the authorities to spend money that's in the investment pool. Just to kind of give some context to it, the pool is created by all eligible funding that is not needed for immediate expenditure. So all that we call it residual cash is invested. So we have, a property tax cycle where we get collections twice a year, and there has to be spending throughout the year of those monies. So we hold on to them as those districts need the money. In 2023, the pool had an average balance of about $1.1 billion and an average interest earnings rate of 2.59%. We are a little bit of a longer duration pool, but we are quickly catching up, and we're getting a lot of investments in the 4 and 5% range right now. 2023 actually had the highest earnings ever since the pool's inception. We allocated over $28.7 million out of that pool, and $13 million of that was allocated to county funds alone. And the general fund received over $5 million. We do work closely with the budget office to ensure that those revenues are projected within the general fund forecast, but this pool does impact county revenue streams. Yes.
Sarah, you mentioned that we earned $28.7 million in interest, of which 13 went to county funds. You said $5 million to the general fund.
Yes.
Where'd the rest go?
Oh, we have several other county funds with pretty significant invested balances. The road fund, REIT funds, community development, I think mental health sales tax, the exhibit halls, some of the things that fund the fair. So all of those like fund balances and any cash that's not being needed for immediate expenditure, all of that is invested in the pool.
Thank you.
How is it determined how much goes into the general fund?
Right. So each fund's directed balance, there's sort of a prorated share. So the 1 billion, whatever percentage the general fund is of that $1 billion balance, that's the amount of interest earnings that they would get for the month. Does that make sense? It's kind of, you're getting a prorated share of the monthly interest earnings.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And when I talk about the general fund actually benefits. They benefited from the ARPA balance. We were able to put a lot of those monies into the general fund. Also, the permanent reserve, we're able to invest that. That all goes to the general fund, as well as all the pooled residual cash that stays within the county's banking. And so the general fund benefits from all of those funds, actually.
Yeah, and just one comment too. I think it's important to remember that, at least speaking for the county funds, that the vast majority, if not all of it, is funding that is allocated already, just not needing to be spent at the moment, or it is our minimum reserve fund balances. So it's not, the kind of narrative has kind of poked its head out in the public recently, that it's just money sitting there that could be used for anything. It really is not.
Yeah. And just to expand on that a little, a lot of this in the past too has been capital funding for school districts. They've issued bonds to build schools or, other buildings, purchase land and that sort of thing. So we're holding all of that money and just until it needs to be expended by the district itself. And we have no authority over the spending of the district's monies. So, and that includes the county. So we're getting information on a daily basis about what money districts need, and we sell investments and provide them with the available cash. So as mentioned,
One
excuse me,
question.
sorry.
What are the investments that we put the pool into?
Yeah. So the policy actually specifically outlays what we can invest in. And actually, we base our policy strictly on state statutes. So what we're investing in right now, it's largely a lot of treasuries. Honestly, we do have some corporate, some commercial paper, but we are restricted by statute to fairly safe investments. And we do have a duration that we follow. Our policy actually outlines not only that, but it outlines all the delegation of authority, all the internal controls that we need to follow. There's quite a list of compliance activities that we're responsible for following. But yeah, all those eligible debt instruments, there's a table in it that's, I think there's like 10 different things that we can, invest in. And I think one of the important things is, the investment policy objectives, right? And the first one is safety. So we're going to invest in the safest instruments that are out there. Liquidity, we need to make sure we have cash available when the districts call and they need their money. And then yield. So the earnings are kind of like third in terms of the priority that's set out for our investment objectives. So really looking at the safest investments possible. All of our investment earnings are reported in Workday. All the county departments are able to view those. The financial managers make sure they're integrating those into their forecasts as they need to. And then again, this is the information that we're getting really specific on in those quarterly meetings. And we also have an investment advisor that assists us with operating the pool, government portfolio advisors, and they're in the markets every day as well. And we do have our own investment officer within our office. And so, she'll be reporting out on these matters as well. But this policy is important for operating that investment pool and safeguarding all the resources of not only the county, but the district.
Next slide, please. All right, this is Mark's going to go through this section.
Great. So what I want to preface this section with is, when you think of the county, you have to think of it as one county, but with many different businesses. So throughout the county, we have the courts, we have the sheriff, we have public works. Each of these different activities receive funds, and the funds that they receive in most cases are restricted to those activities. So although we have over 100 funds in the county, and 80 of those are pretty active. They're having transactions that occur in them either on a daily or weekly basis. We can't look at the county finances as a whole by summing up all those funds and saying, here's how much money we have. Because each of those funds, with the exception of the general fund, are restricted for specific purposes. And so I'm going to kind of go through some of the larger funds and kind of give you an idea of what the activity that goes through those funds and kind of the condition that they're currently in. I'm starting with our general fund. The general fund gets a lot of attention because it's our largest fund, and it funds most of the services and activities that interface with the public as far as law and justice goes and administratively. The general fund funds by definition are not restricted. So they can be used for any purpose or expense either within that fund, or they can also supplement another fund. So there's not the restrictions tied to those that I'll talk about with some of the other funds. This is just an example of some of the numbers that we use, and I'm using, I don't know why that says 2022. It should say 2023. I'm using 2023 numbers because that's the last year that we actually have complete. Right now, we're in the process of winding up 2024. Usually, it takes a month or two for us to get all of the activity recorded. And we have preliminary statements usually by the 1st of March or so, and then they are subject to an audit process. So if you look at the general fund, you can see we're about, this is our annual revenues, about 200 million, and about the same level of expenditures. So we've budgeted to spend pretty much the revenue that we take in within the general fund. And then I thought it would be important for council to know, how do we, what do those revenues consist of? So you can see these are our major, our major funding sources. Property tax, clearly the largest, with sales tax being the second largest. And then the rest of them are made up of various, fees and fines, penalties, transfers from other governments, grants. There's almost approximately 300 different revenue streams within the general fund itself. So there's a lot that goes in the general fund. Go ahead.
We have a question
Mark,
there.
I know we're only, 12, 10, 15 days into the year. I've lost track, but do you have, off the top of your head, any idea what are revenue and expenditures for 2024? I'm just curious.
We're looking
at
about
that.
200 million again. I mean,
Yeah. What we are projecting with our monitoring and our fiscal year on close is that revenues are coming in very close to what we budgeted, and expenses are coming in very close to what we budgeted. Once we know the final transactions, we can estimate if there's any estimated savings.
Nice work. Thank you.
I would guess it's going to be between 200 and 210 million, somewhere in that range. So as you see, it didn't change a lot. Again, this should be the 2023 numbers, but it didn't change a lot from the 2023 numbers. We've not grown, exponentially from the prior year. So
Can I ask?
yeah.
What are examples of the goods and services that makes up 14%?
So we also provide, for example, we get fees for like pet licenses. And so there's, fire permits. There's a lot of things that go into the services that we provide that we collect fees for. So that's going to be what's in your 14%. Also, we have, I'm trying to think of the best way to describe the services that we collect fees for. There's other fees that we have. For example, the treasurer receives fees for part of the collection that that the treasurer's office does for REIT. We have recording fees that we receive, auto license fees that we receive. So all that's kind of rolled up into that number.
Okay, I just saw that you had another category called fees and licenses, which was 1.8%.
Sure,
But you
okay.
just described the other category
Yeah.
as fees and licenses. So are they kind of combined?
Well, fees and licenses, you're right. Those are probably more like the pet licenses and things like that. Whereas the recording fees, the auto license fees, those are probably in the goods and services category. So, because they're actually receiving services for those activities. So,
And I just would add, Mark, with the general fund, there's hundreds of lines of revenues.
Yeah.
And this is a very interesting conversation that we can have in further meetings. There's also a great dashboard that we'll have for the 2024 and the 2025 budget out on our budget website. And maybe there's an opportunity to kind of show you how that works. And you can start to dig in to see what those things are and how much there is per specific line item. It's a interactive virtual dashboard, which I think you guys might find interesting to learn more about the details.
yep. Okay. Excuse me. I've broken up the expenditures on this just for, again, this is one of the ways that we can look at how the expenditures are in the general fund are happening. You can see that salaries and benefits, most of what we do in the general fund are people. We have staffing that provide these services to, the citizens. 65% of what we have in the general fund are people. And so it's by far the largest component of what we're paying out of there. Supplies and services, to support those people, we have to have tools, right? So those are the tools that help support those people. And then there's a little bit of capital, it's very small. And then we do transfer funding out of the general fund to help support other funds, for example, our health department or our parks department. So those transfers are made from using general fund revenue into other funds. So our projected unassigned fund balance at the beginning of the year was 44.1 million, and then the end of 2023, I got that number changed. I see that is 42.4 million. And then our target for the year, which is based on our fund balance policy, we talked about that before. We have fund balance policies where we should be targeting our ending balance at for many funds. For the general fund in 2023, it was 32.2 million. So we're within compliance of our fund balance policy. So any questions on the general fund? Not today. Okay. So we're going to go on to a couple of other of our major funds. The road fund is our second largest fund. Again, you'll see the word up there, funding sources are restricted. The funds that go into the road fund are restricted for use for specific activities. We can't just take those funds and transfer them over to another fund to use for something else. Okay, so they're restricted. The major resources coming in are listed there, primarily the property tax on the unincorporated area. So the road fund levy is only for unincorporated Clark County. Then there's some other funds from the state. Fuel tax is a shared revenue with the state. And you can see that they also, for capital purposes, they transfer in some REIT and they have impact fees as well. And so those are some of the larger ones. They also do a very good job in applying for and receiving grants. They do a very good job of bringing in grant revenues, whether they're federal grants or state grants, to help with our transportation system. So,
Quick
question. Yes.
Sorry, my brain's still on the last slide. You had talked about the projected unassigned fund balance.
Yes.
And then there's the reserve policy target. Are
Yeah.
those the same things?
No.
Oh, okay. What's the
So
difference?
when we look at our unassigned fund balance, that's the amount that we have not committed for other purposes. For example, our reserve policy is taken out of our unassigned fund balance. So in addition to our unassigned fund balance, we also have our policy required items, which would be our reserve. There's a few other line items in there that are also assigned, and we'll talk about those when I bring those back to you every year to say, I recommend that we assign for a certain thing. Some of them are by ordinance, some of them are by accounting policy. But then there may be other recommendations we make for other purposes. For example, if we have a large commitment that we know of that's going to be coming out of the general fund in the current year that we have not already accounted for, I will recommend that we assign for that fund balance. In the past, it's been if we've used fund balance to, for example, balance our annual budget. I will recommend that we set aside that funding so that we don't spend it in advance of balancing the budget. So,
Okay, thank you.
I have one question on this slide as well. You may not be able to answer it, and maybe you can just email it to me later. But I was really curious about the fuel tax revenue that we receive, and you read about it all over the place about how the state is having a real problem with the road fund. I'm just curious. Again, you don't have to answer now, but I would be interested in kind of seeing that history of what it's doing.
that's a good point. And that's actually on the next slide, on the road fund slide. That fuel tax, it is subject to it's a shared revenue with the state. So although it's been pretty consistent, there has been talk about because of electric vehicles and other modes of transportation that it's been declining. So I could give you, a 5 or 10 year history of where that fuel tax.
That'd be
has been.
great. Thank you.
Okay.
Do you have that in like a trend line?
Right.
Right.
That's how I would provide it.
Good.
Yeah.
And could you provide that to all of the
Sure.
councilors? Great.
Again, looking at the fund balance in the road fund right now, it's very healthy. We're, at the end of 2023, we were at 45 million. Again, a lot of times we accumulate fund balances for anticipated projects. And we know that when you look at the annual construction plan or the 6-year tip for the road fund, that this funding has already been committed to these different projects. So although it may be a temporary measurement of how much funding we have at this time, a lot of this has already been programmed for expenditures in the next year or future years. So, looking at it, at one point in time isn't the full picture of why we have accumulated a fund balance in this fund. So, okay, let's go.
Is that just within the 6-year capital budget, or is it a longer period that we're planning for?
Usually with the road fund, they're planning 6 years out. That's what the transportation improvement plan, the TIP, shows. It's a 6-year plan. And so they're trying to balance revenue streams with the projected expenditures over that 6-year period. And they take into consideration what they already have on hand as they're planning out how much they need.
Great.
So,
Thanks.
okay, let's go to the next fund real quick. And again, these are some of the larger funds of the county. Our health department, it's interesting because 5 years ago when we were, dealing with, or 4 years ago when we were dealing with COVID, the health department was going through some major changes because of a large inflection of federal dollars. And you can see now that some of that it's starting to drop off a little bit. You can see the grant portion of the health department is still quite large. It's over half of the revenue that they're receiving. They do have license and permits. They do some food handlers permits. They do some occupational permits for restaurants and things like that. Charges for services is relatively small. And then transfers, they receive a transfer in from the general fund every year for a certain amount of administrative costs that they have. So, and then again, their expenditures, salaries and benefits, they're all people. They're almost 80% people that are providing services directly out to the citizens.
So I see a good portion of this is from the COVID grants and the IRA funds and such. And then the majority of the costs are for staffing. So are they projected to have to decrease
Exactly.
staffing to,
Yeah. And
because
we've
there's
had
no
those
other source to
conversations.
fill that, right?
We've already started having some of those conversations with our public health department about how they're going to have to change as the federal funding drops off, what the next stage is, how will they be able to provide services, or do those services change? So that we're constantly working with the departments on matching their revenue streams or the expenditures with the revenue streams that they have.
And I will clarify too, with the COVID funding, we had no ongoing expenses tied to one-time COVID funding like ARPA. So
Right.
but they're having a reduction in their ongoing grants through foundational public health that they receive from the state. They're having reductions there that do support ongoing funding.
And I think you'll hear from the department as they talk about it more. A lot of the state funds aren't indexed, so they get flat revenue from the state. So as salaries increase and other expenses increase, it's not matching, and they're facing some structural problems with that. But they are looking at that, and there will be ensuing conversations.
Okay, let's go to the next fund. So these are some of the other governmental funds that the county has, and I'm just going to go through these briefly. Our public safety sales tax, it's about 1.5 years old now, and so we're just starting to gather some information on that. Camp Bonneville is always a popular conversation, although it's really interesting because the way this fund works is we request a budget up front, the Army funds that, and then we spend it down. And so it's a very unique grant in how we work with this. Another fund is there's two different funds here. We have our Event Center Fair Fund, which is the operations of the fair. And then we have our Exhibit Hall Dedicated Revenue Fund, which was put in place to retire the bonds when the event center was built. And there's going to be discussions on these as well, because we've gotten to the point where the amount of funds that we have available in the dedicated revenue fund exceed the amount of debt that we have. And now we're able to use it for other purposes. For example, helping with some of the projects in the Fairgrounds Master Plan. And that's going to be coming back to you at some point during this year, where we look at what expenditures and how to prioritize those expenditures. There's actually quite a bit of revenue that will become available over the next few years for that. That again, restricted in the ability to enhance our fairgrounds. So,
And just,
Well, I just had a question on Camp Bonneville, and I know we are going to be receiving 6 million from the
Mhm.
Army. Where would that be reflected in 20?
yeah.
Go ahead, explain this a
So
little bit.
typically what happens is they put a capacity available. So we'll have 6 million available. We will request how much we spend in a budgetary action. They will supply that to us and we'll spend it down. Then the next year, when we have a new budget, we will request it. They'll send it to us and we'll spend it down. So that would take many years to get to the 6 million. Okay, so they've just allowed us a capacity. Does that make sense?
Doesn't.
Okay.
And so what we draw down will be reflected in these numbers.
Exactly.
At some point.
Emily would come back to you with an annual budget for Camp Bonneville, say we need $1 million this year. And that's what the Army would supply within that 6 million. And then we would need to spend it down. And once we've spent it down based on whatever activities they are, then we would make a new request.
Yeah, and Mark, just so you know, this council just approved 6 million for specific amendment. It wasn't a generic cleanup.
Right.
Give us the money. It was actually the Army that came to us to make some adjustments. So it's a little different than the normal.
Yeah.
We asked for it and spent it down.
And those activities that will be determined that need to happen, those are the activities that would be placed into an expense budget. So if they're monitoring, well monitoring or whatever it is. So.
Thank you. Okay.
I was just going to mention as well that on the exhibit hall fund, we actually refunded some of the debt that was being paid out of that fund so that we could continue to receive the state sales tax credit revenue. So we have tens of millions of dollars over the next 15 years that are going to go into this fund that can fund the capital projects out there. And like Mark said, address some of the needs that are in the Fair Master Plan. And so looking forward to discussions on that, certainly.
Yep. Next slide, please. So there's some other funds as well. Community development is our building fund. This is based primarily on fees. So when someone comes in and is looking for a permit for building, they would pay a fee. One of the things that I want to point out on this, you see that the fund balance is fairly significant compared to the revenues we receive. And that is intentional because in an example of if we had to shut down building today, just as an example, and not accept any more permits, we still have a backlog of work that has to be done that has already been paid up front. And that is estimated to be, 9 to 12 months worth of work. So you can see that our fund balance is almost 100% of what our annual revenues are, or our annual expenses. So again, it is quite intentional of where this fund balance is. You can't say, well, we have 100% fund balance in this one and we have 50% over here. It's not as good. Each of these funds have very specific requirements. And as you look at the fund balance policies that have been created for these funds, it's very intentional about where we wind up with these fund balances. And I think it was to Councillor Young's point, although these funds are available right now and they're being invested by the Treasurer's Office, they are committed to projects. So it's not like we have, $12 million sitting out there that we can just spend. Also, this is a restricted fund. It can only be used for the building activities within the county. It cannot be used for other purposes, and we're very careful about that. When we're audited, the state auditors will go through each of these funds, and they will look for instances where we've not used the funds appropriately. So it's in the auditor's office, we're very careful about how the revenues come in and the expenditures are going out. So
What are the services that are 25%? Charges for service.
I see that. I don't know the difference between issuing a license and a permit or providing a service, to be honest. I can get back to you on that.
And some of it may be the operating expenses for their system that process it, that we have licenses
I'd have to look again.
and contracting out something.
Within this fund, there's not as many revenues as the general fund. There's not 300, but I could quickly go in and say, oh, here's the services that they're providing. So.
And I also want to note on this one of the third funding source, the general fund, 1.6 million. Hopefully that will not be a subsidy that we'll be using in 2024 because council did approve some fee adjustments for wetland and habitat. So that's a way to help. They haven't adjusted fees many, many years. I think most of our fees have not been adjusted. And we're, as Councilor Young had mentioned earlier, we're starting to look at those. So hopefully that subsidy from general fund will be eliminated, which will, it's one more a little amount to help us with our deficit.
Yeah. And to your point, Kathleen, the general, I'm going to need a glass of water. The general fund does use services from like the permit center. So there's going to be a little bit of services that the general fund will have to pay for. So next slide, please. Our parks, this is a very popular fund. We not only provide parks within the MPD, which is the municipal park district, but we also have regional parks. So this fund, it's kind of misnamed. It's actually our parks within the county fund. And again, we have to be very careful at using the MPD funds for MPD parks. And then the general fund, as you see, also contributes to the regional parks, which are outside of the MPD. Again, this is a very interesting dynamic here. If you look at the expenditures, we have about 40% are salaries and benefits, but 60% are supplies and services. And those are services that we use to, help maintain these parks. We may be contracting out different, aspects of those services. So it's, again, each of these funds have a different dynamic in the revenues that come in and how we're using those. So questions on this fund? I'm going to try and go through these a little. I think I have like 2 more slides or 3 more slides. So the next slides, please. Okay, so mental health sales tax. This is a fund that we've looked at very carefully this year. Thank you.
Choke it.
We've looked at very carefully this year from the advisory committee. You can see that the fund balance had been building and was up to about 23 million at the end of last year. Our reserve policy only required us to have about 5 million. And so this year, again, the budget has been very intentional in spending down that fund balance. And so you'll see significantly more larger awards this year that were budgeted for. And so again, another example of how we're trying to respond to each fund individually and what revenues are available, what funds are available, and how they're being spent. So, questions on that? I know for the returning counselors there, this is old news, but again, there was a lot of intention put into how to spend these funds down in the committee this year. So, okay. Here's some of the other funds that you'll hear terminology for. We have REAP funds. We actually have REAP one. Oh,
Actually, I do have a question on the
Okay.
mental health sales tax. So this is money that gets built up every year as those funds come in.
Mhm.
And the reserve policy, how is that balance determined?
So the reserve policy is usually based on what is the next year's ongoing expenditures or what is being committed to ongoing. Most of the funds projects, and Emily can correct me if I'm wrong, are either one-time funds or grants that are going out into the community, but there are ongoing programs that continue from year to year. And so we've tried to look at the reserve policy saying, if we had a major decrease in the sales tax, what do we need to support these ongoing programs so that they don't have to make immediate cuts within those programs?
And do we have a clear number on what those ongoing projects would be at this point?
Yeah.
We could get that to you.
We do
Absolutely.
it. We do in the 6-year forecast.
Yeah.
And I can also share the fund balance policy that outlines, I think there's 3 criteria that are determined to come up with that number. And I could send that to
Yeah.
the council.
Because as I understand it, we could go up to a 3-year grant for some of our projects.
Yes, so there's internal projects, there's internal staff, and that's the ongoing compete. And there's an external RFP program, and Counselor Young is well versed in this as I am, but those can be multiple year, one-time grants. So you could give someone $1 million that spreads over 3 years, for instance,
Chair,
external.
If I could add to that, you know, there is, I think, a council level discussion that we need to have about the mental health sales tax fund soon. And when I say soon, that's before we go out to the community with an RFP for grant applications. And that is essentially, you know, it's not been an issue for quite some time because we have had a fund balance that we haven't really been able to spend because it's taken the community some time to understand the fund, know that it's there, and apply in a way that they get approved. So we just had this continually growing balance. Now it's going like this really quickly. And so we're getting to this point where, similar to the public safety sales tax, there is no, I mean, all of that funding has been essentially dedicated for ongoing expenses.
For several
And
years.
so the mental health sales tax is approaching that as well. And so we kind of need to look at this from a policy. Are we okay, you know, having the entirety of the fund going towards ongoing expenses? Or do we want to dedicate a portion of that fund that remains available for grant opportunities? Because we could be, if we don't address this soon, we could really quickly be in that situation where we don't have any funding opportunity for grants.
Go ahead.
So I'm sending you guys a link to the budget process and putting the slide number that has the 6-year forecast. One of the reasons why it wasn't spent down is because COVID's restrictions, the people who received the grants could not perform those services. So that was a major impact. But this budget presentation that has the forecast splits it out by ongoing and one time. And so there is no, it's an annual process. So yes, council can certainly look at that because it is committed this year. And so staff is not going to be like adding projects during the year. It is part of an annual process. So I don't want anybody to be concerned that we're going to spend more than what was presented unless council directs otherwise before.
Well, I would just say, I think this does deserve more of a conversation, but that we don't have to have right now, but we could have coming up in the near future.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Mark, really quick question on the reserve policy. And I think I heard you mention earlier that we are required to keep a $5 million reserve policy. Is that what I heard?
So the reserve policies are created by council.
Oh,
So
okay.
they're your policy that says, here's how much we need to keep in this fund.
Got it.
And we help prepare those.
Mhm.
Created
and
by
make
council
yeah,
with
we-
advisement of.
We help create those and then discuss those with council, but then council adopts those. So they're your policies.
Okay, but we can change that
Sure.
threshold.
Absolutely.
Got it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Keep in mind in this fund, there are specific positions that this fund supports. So we want to make sure that if those people, those FTEs that we're funding from this, from the mental health sales tax, we have the ability to fund those out into the future as well. And that's kind of that ongoing aspect. So those positions that are being funded by the mental health sales tax are part of that policy.
And just to belabor it just slightly more, I would say this fund balance policy was created in coordination with the Mental Health Sales Tax Advisory Board and the subject matter experts that are chosen to be a part of that board. So I think if there's desire to look at that and evaluate that, that can happen. But as Councilor Young talked about, the time frame to get into that and have that done is over the next couple of months so that it's ready to go when we have budget process going.
And all of these things can be discussed further.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you.
I think I have one more slide. These are some of the funds that you'll hear about. They're not in front of you very often, but they do impact some of the decisions you make. REIT is our real estate excise tax. We have two major REIT funds, REIT 1 and REIT 2. There's specific requirements about how we can use each of those. Traffic impact fees, park impact fees, conservation futures. Again, that's a property tax that we receive to help support some of those purchases that we have for those lands, those open lands. And then we have a technology reserve, which is projects. We have several internal service funds that we use. We collect money from different funds. For example, our technology reserve to help fund the replacement of computers or technology type projects. So next slide, please. Enterprise funds, these are always the fun ones. These operate more like a business. Tri-Mountain is a enterprise fund, so it should pay for itself. The revenues and the expenses should break even. We also have a solid waste clean water, which has been a big discussion this last year. It is a fund that is intended to pay for itself. And so the adjustments to the fees that was recently approved by council will help them sustain that expense requirement that they're going to have to incur over the next 5 years. Then we have a wastewater maintenance and operation fund. So next slide. Some of the other funds that are internal service funds, we talked about elections. We have a general liability. This is our insurance fund. We have a healthcare self-insurance fund, which we collect the fund for our region's health care plan and administer that internally. We have our fleet fund and our facilities fund. So these are all different types of funds that we have that we manage. We collect revenue from throughout the county and use for the projects that they expend. So I think that's it. Yep, that's it. So
We're done.
thank you. Any more questions about funds? It's very complex. You know, we try to make it as simple as we can. Again, if you kind of think of it as different businesses within the county, and we can't intermingle the revenues within those funds, that's kind of the best way to think of it. So we're happy to answer any more questions, or you're welcome to email me or call me.
Any additional questions?
I'll
Go
just
ahead.
thank you for providing this information. My head is full.
It's time for lunch.
I know, it's lunchtime.
Thank you.
Well, I hope you can find a little bit more room by 1 o'clock because we'll be reconvening at that time. So thank you. This has been a wealth of information, foundational again for all the decisions that are ahead of us. So with that, I will adjourn the work sessions. Thank you.
Thank you.